Hello and welcome to a special extra episode of a Bazaar podcast. As per usual, you'll still be able to find this episode on YouTube as well as Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and via RSS feed for your favorite listening app of choice. And we will have a regular scheduled episode somewhere towards the end of this week as per usual. So this is more of a special where we won't be strictly following the regular kind of script that we have for the podcast. We're just doing this impromptu, but we got a wonderful opportunity to interview one of the developers of the game. So we'll be doing introductions as usual still. I am first of your hosts, MetallFenix, and I am joined by my co-host, Sixten.
Yes, I'm Sixten. Super excited to be here.
As well as Walter.
This is Walter. Sorry for no new avatar. This was a last minute surprise. I didn't have time.
And finally, of course, the guest of honor, lead game designer Toby Sarnelle. Why don't you introduce yourself a little bit? Tell people about you.
Hey, my name's Toby. I've been working at Tempo for 2.5 years or so. I'm lead game designer, as you said. It doesn't mean I am the lead game designer. We have other large, we have a design director. Obviously, there's Andre. But I've worked here for, like I said, 2.5 years-ish. Before that, I worked at mobile studio Dots, working on the mobile game Two Dots. I was the lead designer of Two Dots. Worked there for over 10 years. Before that, I worked at a PC strategy game company called Stardock, where I worked on 4X strategy games for like 5 years. So I've been in the industry for a very long time at this point. And I make board games in my spare time. My first board game was published last year and is shipping in a couple months. So that's exciting too.
That's awesome. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's incredible. I'm a big board
What
game
is it? What is
fan
it called,
collector
by
on
the
the
way? Like,
side.
so I
Yeah, what's
can.
the... You gotta give us the
Uh,
dates.
my board game is called Tend, Tend. It's
Hmm.
from Ivy Studios, the makers of Moonrakers and Veiled Fate and Fractured Skies and a whole bunch of other really good games. They're a Kickstarter-based studio. Really nice guys out of Nashville, Tennessee. Um, they're publishing this for me, and then we might do some more stuff in the future too. So that's exciting.
There you
That
go.
is
I'll
exciting.
definitely have to check that out.
Yeah, for sure.
I also thought that we might ask, how did you end up working with Tempo?
I started just looking for jobs. So my old studio Dots was acquired by Take Two, who then acquired Zynga, and eventually we were shut down. And our product was moved overseas, which is always a fun time, right? And so I had to find a job. And looking for jobs, I saw Tempo's listings, and it just sounded like a thing I would be really into. The game looked really cool. Interviewed for the job, and it was a really good fit. I've been a huge fan of card and board games for forever, basically, um, as evidenced by making my own board game. Uh, and so I was very excited to work on it. Went through the interview process, met Andre. Things went great, and got hired.
There you go. That definitely does sound like a match made in heaven. And for people who might not be entirely familiar with game design, I thought you could also give kind of a beginner-friendly intro to what exactly falls within your role as the lead game designer.
Yeah, so when you're a game designer, you do all kinds of stuff, right? Especially at a small studio like this with a fairly small design team. So I kind of have my toe in everything. I wear a lot of hats. Um, Me and the design director, we were hired at a similar time. I think he started like a month or two before me. And we get along really well. We work really well together. And we have very well overlapping skill sets. He's really, really good at technical stuff in a way that I'm not nearly as good. And like wrapping his head around data structures and things like that, which I do have a computer science background. I do understand that stuff, but I'm not nearly as good at it as he is. But I have a real passion for actual creative card design and mechanical design. So we've kind of split the work in a lot of ways, where I do a lot of the new content and creative stuff and balancing, and he does a lot of the more technical, like how's everything going to work side of it. But everybody is involved in everything. So I'd say for like my daily what I do, it's a lot of different things. It's managing spreadsheets, it's looking at data, seeing how things are performing, it's looking at what needs to be adjusted, it's keeping an eye on the Discord and feedback and how people are interacting with the game, but then also creating new cards for the future, coming up with new systems, looking at systems for monetization and for uh, meta design and like kind of just everything that is in the game, um, and modeling out stuff when you need to, designing new cards, writing art briefs for new cards, um, just tons of different stuff, and then lots and lots of meetings. Most of our design work is done in these large core design meetings with pretty much the entire design team, where we will go through everything with a fine-tooth comb, basically. But usually you will do like creative work outside of that, right? Because it's very hard to be super creative, like creating new things from nothing in a group setting like that, especially in Discord, because we're a remote studio. Um, but we'll go through everything. So like people will come like create stuff on their own and then come together and talk through it and decide what should be a certain way or changed, right? So it's a lot.
Yeah, there you go.
Right.
Talk about jack of
Yeah,
all
I mean, can
trades.
I actually ask something about that? Like, so so you have independent like design when someone comes up with a design for a card, let's say, right? And then that card is part of a pack that already has like a pre-chosen theme, so there's some holistic energy to the pack. Stop me if I'm wrong. How
Yeah,
do
it's not
you?
so. So it's interesting. That's not really been how we do it for this kind of stuff for the most part,
Okay.
because of I think what you were about to say of like how do you make these things mesh together. Um,
No, that's not
that
what
is,
I was gonna say. I was actually gonna
okay, sorry.
say. Okay, I was actually gonna say like, how do you? Okay, how do you balance the tension between making something that's cohesive and making something that isn't too parasitic? Like the best thing to do is just play 6 cards on your board from the next pack, and that's like your deck. Or like how do you find the balance between like to me some of the most like awesome thing about the Bazaar is like the boards have a kind of narrative to them, like Vanessa with the sniper rifle and the crow's nest with the silencer, like it's like tells a story. And on the one hand you want creativity, like players to be able to feel like they're writing their own story to create their own narrative when they play the game, but you also like don't want it to be like too prescriptive. So how do you balance that? Like, because that's to me some like the hardest thing to nail. Like so many games try this, and I think that you guys have nailed it insanely well. Um, and so I'm just curious about that aspect of it.
So I wouldn't say there's like a hard and fast rule for how you do it. It's just something you have to keep in your head at all times. Um, you want to make sure that the cards work together, right? That they make sense as a cohesive pack. But to your point, you don't want them to feel like this is the only way they work. But there isn't really a specific like rule set for how you do that. You just need to keep it in mind and then adjust things as you do. So like in specific examples, it can be something like making something scale on friends instead of dinosaurs, even if dinosaurs are the thing you're doing in the pack, because dinosaurs are also friends. So that like for instance, I think Rex
Yeah,
has
more
that ability on him.
interoperability. Yeah.
Um, that doesn't always work, right? But that is kind of the idea of like if you look at the Dualtron pack, right? Like it's asking you to use friends and to have certain effects, status effects, but it's not telling you to use these specific cards in it, right? And the hope is that there will be other cards that will fit in there. And so it's a lot of that of like trying to find ways that you can reference what other cards are doing without actually being explicitly like use it with this card. and it can be a challenge. I mean, sometimes you don't hit it exactly, but it's just something you want to keep in mind as much as possible, and just trying to make sure that your cards are modular. And there's a tricky balance there because you want people to find combos, right, and to be excited that and like have
Yeah,
direction on what they
the
want to
sense
do,
of
right? Like
discovery.
if it's too open, it can be too much for some players, right? But you want this idea of this thing naturally feels like it should go with this thing, and then that to work. But you also want things where people can discover emergent, weird combinations that you may not have thought of. So yeah, it's a little bit of everything.
So, on the topic of coming up with the initial design for items, something I've always been curious about is you have a lot of levers to balance items, whether it be the cooldown, the effect itself, the rarity. But one aspect that so far I don't think has been changed for items once they are released is their size. So we have small, medium, and large items. So I'm curious, how and when do you decide on which size an item should be? Is that one of the first things you decide for an item? Is that part of like when designing the art and the story of the item, or does that come later in the process? And also, is
Yeah.
that something you have ever considered changing once the item is already in the game? Like, has there ever been a talk of, oh, maybe this medium item should actually be a large because it's too powerful, etc.? So that's my question.
Yeah, I would say that that is almost always the first thing you design with the card is the size. The reason is that the art is not easily adaptable to different sizes. It actually is a decent amount of work to change an item from one size to another for an artist. And ideally, we would like to be spending that work on making more stuff, not changing stuff that we already have. So generally, we feel like if the card isn't working in its current iteration, um, it's better to just change what it does and still use the art that we have rather than require resources to change something that we could change in another way, right?
Yeah, and so when it comes to the size itself, so it seems that it's more about the art of the item, or like the theme of the item, rather than necessarily that it has to do with balancing. Whereas, like when you balance an item, you instead go with the effect or the cooldown. Is that right? Like it isn't necessarily
Yeah.
that large items are always the most powerful. Necessarily, it's more like, oh, this feels like a large item to us. Is that am I getting that right?
Yeah,
I'm just
generally, although
curious.
we also generally try and skew that the large items should also be the most powerful. Like we have different like internal concepts of what large, medium, and small items should be allowed to do power level wise, so that they do also feel like they make sense to be large items. When we first started, there was less of that in the design file, and it felt really bad to use large items. And one of the things we've really focused on since I've been here is making sure that large items feel good because they are a huge investment, right? Like it's a
Yeah,
big
so I was
deal
going
for
to ask
taking up
because it
these spaces.
seems as the game has gone on, initially we had, for example, the infamous throwing knives build, which revolved around this small item that just killed the opponent. Whereas as the game has gone on, it seems that more and more of late game win conditions are large items, right? Like you're moving away from these small bronze items or mediums being the defining part of a build. It seems that we're increasingly moving towards large items being like the big payoff item, which I think, of course, makes sense. But is that something that has been a conscious effort for you guys to try and like avoid small items being too doing too much stuff,
Yeah,
basically?
generally. I mean, there's a couple reasons. I mean, part of it is like a complexity issue. Like if you have a million small items on your board and they're all super complex and doing a lot of stuff, it's impossible to read what's going on. Now, granted, it can be impossible to read what's going on in the late game anyway, but it makes it even worse. And then part of it is that you just can't ever compete with a small item that is extremely powerful as a large item, right? Like it's just it will become always the best thing to do if your small items are the best because you just have more space for other stuff. So it's kind of a little bit of both. But yeah, that has been a conscious effort is to make large and medium items more your carry bigger items and small items more your support items. Now we still allow some exceptions, of course, but usually if you're going to be a small item that is kind of a carry item, it's going to require a lot of work from the other slots.
Okay, thank you. That's all I had to ask on that.
Okay, I actually had a specific question that I think is quite interesting. So, right now, we have obviously noted that after a pack of card drops, we enter this sort of volatile period where frequently we get a lot of hot fixes with relatively short intervals, and then towards the kind of later stretches of the month, especially on off-patch weeks, things might be a little bit more stable and not so much happening. And my main question was probably going to be whether or not you guys view it as a positive to have this like volatile period, and if you think it's kind of, because I know a lot of people that have said that they really like this hotfix period where, like, from one day to the next, the game is like constantly changing and it feels like you're always discovering something new. But I also know that there are some who comment on the fact that they feel like it can be a bit tough to keep up when things are always changing. So I was very curious about, obviously there's sometimes the necessity of something is just, a new thing might be way too weak or way too strong, and then you kind of gotta do something about it. But just more in general, how do you feel about volatility and hotfixes?
I would say that we view it largely as a necessary evil. Um, I don't think I think that if we had the ability to not require hot fixes as we release stuff, we would like that. Um, we we like that things change a lot, but we don't love releasing stuff that is overpowered, right? Or unplayable. Like neither of those things feel good. Um, but right now we just don't have the resources essentially or systems set up to actually vet these things on the scale they would need to be vetted
Yeah, I was
in order
about to
to not
say
have
like
that happen.
the meta scaling items in particular, I think I mentioned in the last part, is like they clearly require a huge amount of time to test because you have
Yep.
to test them for a whole run every single time, and then you have to try and figure out if you got lucky or unlucky in that run or whatever. Like, so I can imagine it's a huge challenge. Um,
Yeah, and the scale of how many people actually play and test the thing internally compared to what you will get in like an hour of the thing being out is just not even comparable. Like there's no
yeah,
we
you
can
get more
spend weeks and
data in
weeks
the
and
first
weeks, right?
hour than you could in if you
Yep.
guys tested if you guys tested this stuff for a
And
month or whatever.
currently
Yeah.
like you need ghosts to go against, right? Um, and we don't have a huge stable of people making current patch extremely high tier ghosts, right? Um,
Okay,
something we're
yeah. No, I can
trying
see how, right,
now.
you need to simulate a meta on
Yeah,
a patch that isn't out
exactly.
yet, and okay, yeah,
And
there's
so you kind of
definitely a
can't do
lot
that.
of
So
problems to solve.
something we're
Yeah.
trying to do now is we're going to port ghosts from live over, which will at least give us like an environment. It won't be the right meta, but it will be like closer to the meta. But the problem is like for me to test if this new, like let's say the last patch, right? For me to test if the hydraulic press build is too good against the dinosaurs, well, we need to have multiple people playing the press build and multiple people playing the dinosaur build, and then not using the ghosts on each other, and they have to all run into me somehow, right?
Yeah,
Like I don't, and
for
we don't
sure.
even
Yeah,
have
yeah, yeah.
actual data gathering for that environment, so I can't look at data. And if we did, it wouldn't make sense because there's, 4 people playing on it or whatever.
Right.
So it's just kind of like the way it's set up now, you can't really test it at scale in a way that you would want to. That doesn't mean that we can't get there at some point. Like, we have the ability to make simulation stuff, but like we're also releasing a lot of content and like
Yeah,
as we're
and
testing
honestly,
this stuff, we've got new stuff coming, right? Like I'm working
y-
on packs for like 2 months from now, like this week, right?
even if you had like simulations of like boards going up against each other, that still doesn't help you determine what the right number of fire items you need to buy to complete the quest on the fire totem, for example. Like you like the whole part of the meta scaling game that takes place in between the PvP fights. That's the part that is like that's where the sausage is made, right? Is like that is the real power level of the items, of the meta scaling items. Like how fast can you do the out of combat stuff to make them get huge? So it's like even if you had, I could simulate this item against a bunch of different setups really quickly. That still wouldn't tell you how quickly it takes to get to that item in that state. So yeah, I don't envy you guys of trying to balance items like Peace Rot and the quests and the because I can definitely tell it's a extremely it's an onerous task for sure.
And then realistically, the things that go wrong the most are the adjustments that are made after that, right? Like Peace Rot is a good example of like Peace Rot was bad when it first came out, right?
Mhm.
People probably don't even remember it because no one was playing it because it was so bad. So we made a
I
change
remember
that we
the
thought,
original version. I was shown only 8 weapons, and
yeah,
it was like, how would this
yes,
even
it
be
was not
possible
it
to
was not
use?
good.
Yeah.
So even after it launched, it was still not good. So we tried to just make it a little better in a hotfix, which, to be honest, that was something I decided to do. I probably shouldn't have done it, because when you make it like we do at least have time to play test the things before the patch goes live, right? But when we make a
Mhm.
hotfix, you don't really have any time to actually play the thing because you're making a hotfix. Like when would we? You test it so to see that it works, right? You test it to see that it's not completely insane, nothing is completely broken. But it takes hours and hours and hours to play test an item accurately, and
Yeah,
even
and the
then, it
players will
takes
figure out
lots of
how to
people.
optimize it way
Yeah.
faster than you guys can. Yeah,
So you
makes
like
sense.
realistically, something that I need to be better at myself is not buffing things in hotfixes. Like that has become a problem. It's really tempting because you want to do it because it's a cool item and no one's playing it.
I
But
mean,
it
to your
generally
credit, the
goes badly.
subsequent version of it is, I think, one of the best design items in the game, one of the most skill testing items in the game, one of the most interesting items in the game in the current patch. Like the current version where it eats items for gold only is, I think it's one of the most interesting items in the entire game. Um, it's very decision intensive. It requires planning. Like I love, and that's what I love about the quest too, right? I love that you've expanded into this more like the cards make you play the whole run every hour of the day and make decisions and think hard every hour of the day. And it's not like a autopilot click next node, roll shop. Did I get my upgrade? No. Okay, next node. You know what I mean? Like there's way more playing to be had, and I really love that direction. So I just want to compliment is like even though it sounds like I'm nitpicking about the meta scaling items or whatever. I want to say that overall, I'm really, really thrilled with the direction.
Well, I'm glad.
Okay,
Uh,
so I have
it
a
always
question.
takes some back and forth, right, to get where you need to go.
Yeah,
So as you have something I've noticed is that as you have introduced more and more new mechanics, as well as the advent of Mac as a hero, it has become harder and harder for one specific type of strategy to be super dominant because it's we kind of talked about it on the podcast that it's we have so many different rocks and papers and scissors that one single, let's say, for example, playing burn or playing weapons, there is always now something that can counter that effect because there are so many different mechanics nowadays. For example, we didn't really have a regeneration as a win condition until Mac came along. So my question is, in the past, I know you guys have decided against certain uh, item styles, for example, passive items. When the game came out, we had a lot more items that worked like proboscis, for example, where they didn't charge, they just, whenever you did something, they went off. And then it turned out at the time that those kind of effects were hard for other builds to counter. So we moved away from that. But I'm just curious, now that we have so many more mechanics, have you guys ever considered reintroducing those kind of effects and see if they work now, or are you guys essentially basically my question is, if a mechanic in the past has failed or been hard to balance, does that mean that you guys will avoid it for the future, or are you open to experimenting again, like going back to the well? Sorry
No,
if
I
this
mean
is a
there's
confusing question.
no. There's a limited design space in the game. I mean, it's a big design space, but I would say that we are not going to not consider anything. It's just a question of like where things fit and how much stuff makes sense. If you do a lot of when you X, Y, you end up in trouble. So you have to use it sparingly and you have to think about when you want to use it and what items should have it. Um, and it can be tempting to put it on a lot of stuff because it's can be very exciting and thematic and makes you for fun engine building. Um, but yeah, I would say it's risky, but it doesn't mean that we won't do it at all. I'm pretty
Yeah,
sure we
I was
have
just going to
designs
say,
now that
bec-
do it
bec-
in the future.
when I ask people what their favorite item in the game is, and this is both streamers and casual players and competitive players, one of the most common answers is proboscis, which is like a almost like a fan favorite item. But of course, then if you ask people what their least favorite items in the game are, people will mention monitor lizard, old pufferfish, etc. So it's, to me, that effect is, it's both the most fun kind of item, but it can also be the most dangerous. So I understand like why you guys are hesitant to print those items. But personally, I think in like small doses, it's like a super cool effect. So when every item became charging instead, like you guys kind of went the other way around, now everything should be active, I was kind of sad, but it seems that you guys are slowly trying to find that balance. So yeah, I was just curious about your philosophy on that, because there is kind of a tension there. You don't want too many passive items, because then stuff like freeze and slow of course becomes meaningless. Anyway, that's, I think you answered my question pretty well.
Yeah, I would say that
So
proboscis is kind of a little bit of like a legacy. It's probably doing something that's not really allowed as a small item, but
sure.
it's what it has been, and it's a fan favorite, so it is what it is.
I mean, I think
Yeah.
it was a wise decision to take it from Curio for what it's worth. I think it was too reliable to access when it
Yeah,
was a bronze start.
yeah. We generally have a internal rule that it's okay for monster only items to be a higher curve than other items, because they are so inconsistent in getting them. But if it's also a curio, then that kind of goes out the window and it doesn't really work anymore.
Okay.
I
So Metal, do you have a
Yeah,
question?
I was actually quite curious about. We've kind of seen you settle on expansions as the main way that cards will be released going forward. And I think this is a growing trend within the live service game industry, especially for card or card adjacent games, to have these like mini sets of very a concentrated dose of content, but released at higher frequencies than maybe what we would usually see with traditional card sets that would have like hundreds of cards. But I was very curious on kind of what process you went through to settle on this is what we think is the best way to introduce new content to the game.
Um, it's hard to answer exactly. The expansion packs were largely something that I came up with um, when I started because I think that a lot of players are going to identify with specific heroes, right? And want to continue to play them. And if they stagnate and they don't have updates over time and like new items and exciting stuff for them, it can be off-putting, right? Like in a lot of games, you main a certain character and you want to see that character grow and evolve over time. Um, and I think that in general, trying to give content like one trickle piece at a time just makes for much less exciting moments than if you get a chunk of stuff. It also makes it much harder to actually design new themes and things that shake up a character because if you're only introducing a single item in a pool of 100, it doesn't really change much. Whereas if you add 10, you can actually, change what you're seeing through the course of a run fairly substantially. It allows us to like fill in uh, things that are lacking in a character, or builds that are like were fringe can now be more reliable and more variable, can be a really big important part of it, right? Like if you look at just like a puffer build, right, or like a friend build for Vanessa from the start of the game to now, there are just so many different items you can use in different slots to make it functional than it was on release, right? So I think in a lot of ways that was the large part of it. The other part was that making a new hero is very exciting and something we want to continue to do as much as we can, but it takes a lot, right? Beyond even just the 100 cards. It takes concepts for the new hero. It takes new skins and boards and all kinds of stuff, and it takes voice work and it takes all kinds of things. So it felt like having something that was easier for us to make and could slot in a bunch of cards, and then be something that people can experience like as a community, as like a whole set. Uh, just made a lot of sense. So I think that's the real reason, is just kind of what made the most sense for keeping characters relevant and keeping like introducing new content. Like there's not nearly the level of community excitement when we introduce a single new monster, right? Or like Tortuga, or like one or two new items for fan. It's much easier. And like the people who are really dialed in, like will get it, right? And will be very excited for these changes. But there's no indications, right, that these things are being changed. Whereas you don't need to be dialed in to see that there's a new card back, right? It's there. It's in the UI. It's a thing that is shown to you. It's like a, hey, there's new stuff here. Come check it out. Which I think helps people re-engage and be excited about new stuff.
I wanted to ask kind of a little bit along those lines of like when you mentioned you kind of do these like big design meetings where, oh, you mentioned in the pre-show, I guess, that you do these design meetings where you have the whole team and you're like going over everyone's work that they brought together. How much time do you spend on considerations of like hero balance and versus considerations of like node balance? Like, do you spend a lot of time like, man, snack time is OP or what, like thinking about that form of balance in the game, the balance between the options presented as opposed to the balance between the heroes? Like, what is your split on that in terms of where your attention is?
So I would say that in those meetings specifically, it's mostly about new stuff. It's less about like we have balance specific ones of those, but even then, it's more like me or someone else is just generally me is keeping an eye on how balance is feeling, both from feedback and data, and then bringing in a list of these are items that I think are trouble items. These are skills that seem to be problems. This is a build that's too overtuned, or conversely, here's a bunch of items that are underperforming. Their win rates are abysmal, but their people are playing them because they want them to work, right? Um, and then
Yeah,
here are some
water
suggested
wheel.
changes. Yep, exactly, stuff like that. Um, so I'd say that that's generally how it goes, and it's usually an item by item basis.
Okay.
Uh, but if you see a bunch of items in a specific build or on a hero that are underperforming, then we dig into more stuff. Um, but usually that
And
stuff is done mostly outside of that group, and then there's like a list that we go through in the group meeting, because you can't just like meander in a big group meeting like that, or you will just take forever and not get anything done.
yeah, that makes sense. And what about the node balance? Is that something you spend a lot of time thinking about? Because that's something I spend a lot of time thinking about as a player. Is like it's like I already know which character I want to play most of the time, but what I'm actually thinking about in the game is which, which of my, the game
Yep.
is about picking one of three things, right? And so which of the one of three things am I picking, um, and whether those options are balanced well against each other.
Yeah, I mean that is something that we don't talk about on the day to day, I would say. But whenever we're making these encounters, that is a big consideration of like what tier they need to be at so that they are comparable. Like we don't have the expectation that everything should be equal in power level, which is why we
Yeah,
have
of course,
tiers
of
on
course.
those
Yeah,
things,
yeah.
right? Um, but we do want it so that when you roll a diamond one, they all feel good. And right now, I will be honest, like that's not entirely the case all
Yeah,
the
the
time, right?
cult
Like
is
the
not a good
cult is not
rhyme
good.
and
Yeah.
note. Yeah.
But so we will have notes of like, hey, this isn't hitting what we need to. Let's redo it. But we also have 20 other things we're doing, right? So it's always there are a lot of things that are like this has been marked. We need to adjust this, but we have to get to it, right?
Fair enough.
So I have a question relating to hero or class identity, which is if I had to like rank the things I think Bazaar does better than any other card game or something like that, is that at least when the game came out, I feel like you guys absolutely nailed the making each hero feel so distinct from one another. Like I didn't need to look at art or anything. I just look at a board or an item and like it just felt like a pig item or a dooley item or a Vanessa item, which is very impressive because especially as you introduce more and more items to heroes, it can be increasingly hard to keep heroes distinct because on one hand you want to give them new fresh things to do, but on the other, the more stuff you give them to do, the harder it is to make sure they do things that other heroes aren't doing. So I'm just very curious how you guys on a macro level go about deciding, for example, what are things that Pygmalion shouldn't be able to do, or on the other hand, what are things that Pygmalion should only be able to do that other heroes shouldn't? Because one small criticism I had of some of the card packs is that I felt that they, a few items at least, kind of diluted this class identity. So I'm just curious, like, how do you guys go about that tension between wanting to give heroes new things to do, but still keeping their core identity and having clear, strengths and weaknesses?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it is done on a card by card basis, right? Of like we discuss all these things individually in these meetings, and we will bring things up like that there, right? Of like if you're making a new item and your idea was to put haste on it because it made sense thematically, and then someone's like, okay, well that doesn't really make sense for pig, then we might change it there. It depends on if it makes sense in the context of the pack versus the character. So sometimes that can be a little tricky, but yeah, I would say that we don't have like hard and fast rules. Uh, and long ago, I kind of made some level of documentation on like what the heroes would be like what we felt like were like their tertiary, primary, tertiary, secondary, and tertiary abilities. Um, but we don't really like stick to that stuff hardcore, and we don't really reference any of that stuff. It's more just like a feel of like, does this character do enough of these things? And I'd say a lot of the time, um, it's less about actual mechanics and it's more about feel,
Apologies.
right? Of
Yeah, for
um,
sure.
like a pig. Pig is the character that does the most like inventory shuffling, but to what extent those things do it don't matter quite as much. Like Pig has gotten more burn builds uh, since the packs came out, but I don't feel like that has really changed how he feels like he plays. As long as he's still like his burn items are functioning generally in the way that they did previously, right? Of like either they're scaling items that require a bunch of buying, selling, inventory management, like the Kuas, or they're matchbox adjacent. They require other outputs, right? Like they're like for built for a non-weapon build or something like that, right? Like things that he did before that time.
Okay, and so a follow-up question or related to this is when you, and this is perhaps my most excited question. I understand if you, this is hard to answer, but I'm so curious about the process of coming up with new heroes. As in, when you develop a new hero, like we have had confirmation that probably Stell will be the next one or one of the two stellar jewels. How do you, with each hero you add to the game, you are introducing more mechanics. So there's like a more and more narrow pool of like ways to make new heroes distinct. So I'm just curious because it seems to me that at least with Mac, you guys are introducing more and more complex mechanics. Like I think it is fair to say that of the four heroes, Mac seems to be the one that is like the least beginner friendly in a way. So are you guys running with the idea that new heroes are allowed to be more complicated than the original 3, or how do you go about making sure that the new heroes feel different? If you can answer this in any way, like
I would say generally, yes, we feel like it is safer for newer heroes to be more complicated. Although I would say that I think that probably Dooley is more complicated than Mac in a lot of ways to play. The the decision of your core and then like how you arrange your board is so critical, especially for a new player. Like you get these heuristics in your head of how you play it once you've played them a bunch, but when you're not at that point yet, figuring out when you ditch your core, when you use your core, where you put your core is very tough for a new player, and it's a part of every game. Um, but yeah, I can't really speak to how new characters come about because like we haven't really done it yet. When I got here, Stell and Jules existed. Um,
oh, okay,
so
my bad. Okay, I see.
yeah, I mean
So
we're changing what they do. Like the cards themselves are changing what their functions are. Um, and we're trying to make them more distinct with mechanics and gameplay. Uh, but like there has both Mac, Stell, and Jules were all designed and existed um, when I started here. Uh,
okay,
they've undergone massive changes since then, and they will probably go through more of them before they release. Uh, but yeah, from the ground up, it's kind of a completely different ball game.
okay, thank you.
Yeah, something I was a bit curious with is currently the expansions are also placed kind of in the battle pass, and they're also placed notably on different levels within the battle pass as compared to, oh, it's new season patch day, let's just drop everything for everyone all at once. And I've been very curious, not because I can't think of why you do that, but because there are so many possible reasons to want to do it that way. Like, maybe we just want to stagger at the rate at which they hit the pool. I know some people really enjoy the feeling of waiting to have those unlock as kind of almost a mini patch in the middle of a patch when you do unlock it and all of that stuff. But so I was really curious internally, like when you decided on that system, what was the thought process going into it?
Yeah, I mean, part of it is what you described of like it's nice to not have it all dumped on you at once and be able to get to it over time. Um, Part of it is that, you know, we're a business that needs to find a way to make some amount of money so that the business can continue to exist. And so finding a way to have the players who want to invest have a thing they can spend on that feels good and exciting is nice, but then also obviously not requiring that. Uh, so yeah, I mean, I don't think there's anything super complicated to it. It's just like you need avenues for which players will have things they want to spend money on that will be exciting and fun, um, and not required. And yeah, spacing things out, like we said, is both also very nice.
Fair enough, and that kind of does lead me into a different question that I had. Now, the latest two expansions, we've seen this kind of mini sets within the patch for Vanessa and then Dooley with the Tortuga and the custom scope and then the press, hydraulic press. Is this kind of something that's intended to be like a counterbalance of having stuff for people to do just regardless on patch day? Or was it more a case of we designed items we think are cool, but that don't fit within an expansion or don't need an expansion, and we just have to add them to the game one way or another, so might as well just put them in there?
Yeah, I mean those items were more that we had some items we needed to backfill into characters' kits. The in the case of Tortuga and Custom Scope, uh, citrus and coconut were originally actual items in Vanessa's kit, and when we went through her items pre-release, we decided that they weren't really very compelling as actual items, and so we turned them into the tokens that you see them as now. And so she was down 2 items from her base set, so she needed something to be filled in. And then when they were done, we added them in. Things like 3D printer and hydraulic press were more, these were items that Dooley always had in his original item set, but we weren't happy with the designs they had, and we had things we wanted to do with them that were not technically supported at the time. So rather than making versions of them that we thought were subpar, we just didn't have them in yet. And then once the tech got there to be able to add them, we turned them back on. So a lot of these things, they're not really like a, hey, let's get some more stuff for free for people just because. It was more like we feel like we need a couple more items to make these characters on par with everything else. Um, let's just get them in there when we can, right? Or let's turn them on when we can.
Yeah, good answer. That's it's very interesting to
I love
have
that. Good
that
answer.
like dynamic, yeah, like between the no, I just think it's so interesting how much the game changes both from new content being added, but also like stuff
Yeah.
being changed. That's been one of the most interesting things that, especially on this scale and with this frequency, I've never really had that in any other game that I've played because it's pretty rare for like, core sets and core concepts and core mechanics and things like that to change, especially um, you know, early on in the life cycles. It's been very unique in a good way, I would say. The
I
experience of
actually
Bazaar.
I actually wanted to ask about like what I would call like rules changes, like the cleanse stuff, like the heal cleanse percentages and stuff. Um, how do you like approach that kind of situation? Like obviously there was this issue where cleanse was kind of like a fake mechanic in a way. Like it did almost nothing when it just cleansed one burn or poison. Um, and then it went through a couple different iterations. How do you approach that? This like a something like that, like that's not a item, that's not a game piece. Uh, yeah, how do
Yeah, I
you
mean,
approach that?
these are the kind of things that will come up in our core design meetings a lot, where it's like, um, playing a bunch and it feels like heal is lackluster, right? Like it just doesn't feel very good. And we've kind of had this problem for forever. Heal is just kind of like worse shield, right?
Yeah,
Um, shield does what heal does, but it doesn't have a problem. It doesn't like ever fizzle essentially. Like healing does. And now granted, shield doesn't protect you from poison, but that isn't really enough of a distinction to make them feel that different. And so we'll have a meeting where we'll talk about that as a concept, as an issue, as a thing we want to change, and then we'll go through like what are possible fixes, what are things we could do that would make this feel better. And so I think cleanse came out of one of those meetings. And then similarly, once you have the first version of cleanse, play with it for a while, you say, hey, it doesn't really feel like this is doing what we need it to do. Let's try a different version and adjust and adjust until you get to the point of the one that you're happy with. So it's generally fairly organic, and it just kind of comes up as people play, and then is brought up in meetings. And then also we're like looking at feedback also and seeing what other people are saying.
and do you consider like so for something like the cleanse, like for lifesteal weapons no longer count as heal or whatever? Like, do you consider releasing like compensation buffs for a change like that? Because I thought like when I read that change, I was like, oh, I think that this makes test subject alpha like close to unplayable, for example. Like like that there is a bunch of downstream effects from like a rules change that um I assume your answer is just going to be we're going to let it play out and then buff those cards if they're bad, but
Yeah, I mean
is
that
that
is
something you think
generally
about? Yeah.
that is generally how you do it. I mean, we do it to some extent with in general. Like you'll see one aspect of a card get nerfed and another one get buffed, or when there's a rule change, like with the CDR, right? When CDR changed, you saw all the CDR items get numbers reduced.
Mhm.
So we definitely think about that kind of thing, and we adjust things when we can. but you can get into a lot of trouble by doing that, and you being wrong, right? So
Yeah,
it's
because you
often,
overbuff something that doesn't
yeah,
need it. Yeah, makes
exactly.
sense.
It's often safer to kind of watch it play out and then look at it and see what the numbers are and adjust them as you need to.
So earlier you mentioned items like hydraulic press, and I think you didn't mention it, but I think Reynard mentioned virus being another example of an item that had a planned effect, but the technology wasn't there, so it had a temporary kind of text. I'm curious, are there any other mechanics that like that for some of the pre-existing heroes that you're still working on that are like are there other items like that that are that you wanted to be part of the core set but that the technology hasn't been there yet, and are you able to reveal any of those kind of mechanics, or is that something that is you would rather not reveal?
I can talk about it in generalities. There are definitely, I don't know that there are any items anymore that are turned off because they can't do what we want them to do, but there are definitely subsets of items that do things that we are not super excited about what they do for how they feel, um, based on what they are, like conceptually, and what their actual gameplay effects are. Feels like they don't always link up with what you would feel this item would do. Um, and generally, most of those mechanics revolve around out of combat um, interactions with encounters. So like having the ability to control and change your encounter experience and your out of combat experience in ways that we don't currently do it. We have a lot of items that are very passive feeling, that feel like the kind of thing that you would want to be helping you in your adventuring and not necessarily in combat. But we don't have the tech to support a lot of the stuff that we would want to do with those items yet. So I would not be surprised if at some point, I mean, the hope is that we will have tech to support that at some point, and then there will be a bunch of items that will get adjusted and changed.
Okay, so on the topic of like these kind of cool mechanics or tech, I think one of the most genius additions that, if I understand correctly, was one of the latest additions. Like before the game went into closed beta, I think this was one of the like last things you guys added are enchantments, which for me is makes the game so much more like complex and deep, but still super accessible. Like it's just a genius game design. So I know that initially, for example, Obsidian worked differently. I'm trying to remember if
It
there's
was
anything else that's
lifesteal.
been changed.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, basically, my point is, are you guys thinking of exploring enchantments further, like adding more of them or stuff like that? Like adding more ways to modify items. I feel like the quest mechanic itself is like another avenue of this kind of one item being like containing multitudes, essentially, like depending on which path you go down. Is that something you guys want to explore further, or do you guys prefer having these like 9 or 10 enchantments that we already have? Because I understand there is a lot of work going into adding enchantments, of course, but I'm just curious about that and how enchantments came to be in the first place.
Enchantments as a concept existed for a very, very long time. When I started, enchantments as a concept already existed. Um, they just weren't supported for a very long time. Um, I would say that yes, we are definitely interested and excited about the idea of more of them. It's just more a question of like, what are they and what do they do? We
I
have
mean,
some
Jules could
ideas for a
have a
couple.
cheese. Yeah, Jules could have a cheesy enchantment, like she pours cheese on it, and that like or salty or different flavors. Oh,
Yeah, let me
that
get
was
my
the first.
notebook out. Yeah, so I would say that yes, the adding a new enchantment is not a small thing, right? Like it requires a lot of visual design and a lot of work. Um, but in general, yes, we would be interested in more enchantments. I know that we have an idea for one that will probably come at some point. But it's also the more enchantments there are, the bigger cross product for updating them and keeping everything uh
I mean, I do
how
love
we
the
want.
custom enchantments. Like so many of the golden enchantments for pig are just so cool. Like they like you really feel like someone put a lot of thought into each of these enchantments and like what they do, like and like I just like for example like the golden gumball machine that makes the gumballs free, and then it's like I love that concept. Like you could expand on that. So like the obsidian one only makes red gumballs, and the shielded one only makes yellow gumball. Like there could be enchantments that are more, I don't know, just more unique. You know what I mean? And I really love like when you go and look up a card. I mean, I know that you want to add in-game enchantment tooltips at some point, but when you go and look up a card and it just has a really awesome enchantment, that's like always a great feeling. Like, oh, you know what? It was worth my time to go check out and go look and see to make the right play. Like when you go to look up a card and it's like haste 1 for 1, that's like a disappointing feeling. You know what I mean? So I
Yeah.
love when you have the the Deadly Fort of the world, the Golden Gumball Machine, whatever. Like those
Turbo
are all
plasma
so
grenade.
cool to me. Yeah, Turbo Plasma Grenade, Heavy Energy Potion, like all the most OP enchants. Yeah, I think that's a really cool moment in the game. At least for me, that's like exciting when you see a really cool enchant on an item you have.
Yeah, I would say that
So
in general, we want to make those things fun and exciting. But as a result, that means it's a lot to manually keep track of, and that is why we have a bunch of enchants that are kind of out of whack with what they should be, because it's just such an enormous cross product to maintain that it takes a lot of time to do it, and we are doing a lot of stuff, so it doesn't have we don't have the time to do it sometimes.
Yeah, it makes sense.
you mentioned wanting more items that affect nodes, and of course, with the latest expansion, we had the ticket and the expedition system, which I think is one of the coolest, most awesome things you guys have ever done because it fundamentally changes how a run plays out. Like it is such a transformative mechanic, if you will. So I'm like super duper excited for the future of this. I guess my question is just, can we expect more of these kind of um, nodes, events that fundamentally just change how a run plays out in the future? And also how do you guys go about balancing that? Because of course it's it's a very disruptive thing, like just an entire day being different. But I personally adore it. So I'm just very curious about that because it is definitely one of the coolest things for me that you guys have ever released.
Yeah, we will make more of them. Um, I would say that the general design in the game, the philosophy is we want more cool stuff and not less. And we like I'm sure you've heard Andre reference Vintage Cube a bunch when he
Yep.
talks about the game, and that's kind of like a big design principle of the studio and him that we
I'm
don't
a
want to
huge
make
Vintage
anything
Cube
lame.
fan, by the way, if you
Yeah,
didn't. Yeah.
yeah. I
Yep.
mean, I am too. It's great. So I would say that the eventual hope is that we have enough of them that it's not if you get one or don't get one, it's which one you get and finding a way to make it work for you. Like someday, that would be great. Right now, we only have one, so it is very binary as to whether you get it or not. But in a world where there are a lot of them and you're getting one every run kind of thing, it makes it a little bit less of a problem of a like occasional balance spike and more of a just like as long as these are on the same tiers. And then we also have the hope of making more of them that are not as epic as this one is. Like this is you're exploring a cool ruined temple. It's got to be really cool, right? Um, but we would like to also have less insane versions of this kind of thing. And ideally, we'll have tons of them at some point, right? Where it's just like a thing you see in your run all the time.
I
Yeah,
mean,
I
I
feel
love
like
the
it
idea of
really.
side dungeons, yeah, of
Yeah.
alternative hours that you can do. That's such a cool design space.
Yeah. It's also
I
one of the things we've struggled with historically is that we can't really make fights with stakes. Like when we're designing stuff and we're like, oh, we'll put this really big, crazy monster that's going to be terrifying to fight against. it doesn't really matter because if you lose, it doesn't do anything, and if you win, you get a ton of stuff, and you probably get gold even if you do lose. Um, so like, there's no real like punitive thing, and we've talked about like actual stakes for monsters, and it generally is just not fun. However, in these expeditions, having this idea of like there's a treasure room at the end, and if you fail before that, you just don't get the treasure, gives you this like, okay, there is like risk here, um, and it's not going to ruin my run, right? Like you're still going to get to do your hour and to have your stuff you would normally get, but you're missing out on something exciting that you would have gotten otherwise, right? Um, which is nice.
Yeah,
Yeah, I
I
was just
think
gonna say, I feel like this, the idea of every run being different, really, like this kind of ticket system really embraces that. Like, as if we eventually get a ton of them, literally no Bazaar run will be like the one you had before, which I think is awesome. That's all I wanted to add there.
yeah, no, I wanted to say that I'm a little bit curious because I can definitely tell, especially I've been following the game since, the very first, if it was Indiegogo or Indie Republic, like pitch for it. And it's clear, as you said, that the stage where the game is at now, it's become evident that the original idea of kind of just pumping out a bunch of heroes is just not going to be feasible. Did that end up influencing this idea of, okay, if people are going to be very attached to and spend a lot of time with a specific hero, we should instead focus on making the days and the hours play out differently and kind of add the variety more there? Was that factored in?
No, I would not say that. I would say that the having new heroes is like the thing we want the most still. It just takes longer, right? And so these other things are things we can get in the interim that are less lift than an individual hero, and it's like um, they require different resources too, right? Like it's not like you if you just stop making card packs, it would not double the speed of heroes because that's
Mm-hmm.
not what holds them back, right? Um, it's new tech for what you want the heroes to do. It's voice acting and art and design, and there's like so many things, right? Whereas making new cards or making it in a single encounter is doesn't take as much. Um,
So it's more almost of like a symbiotic thing of we're just trying to keep as many parallel lines as possible running at the
yeah,
same time within the resources possible.
yeah. There has never been any discussion since I have started of like, hey, let's slow down how fast heroes come out. It's like we want new heroes. We still want new heroes. We just don't want you to be bored in the interim, right? We want to make the game better. We think that one of the things that makes the game better the most is changes to your run cadence, like your encounters and stuff, because you see those every single run. And the more stuff, the better has been a thing that Andre has always preached, and I agree with. So it's just like let's try and find more cool, fun stuff to do and get it in when we can, right?
I'm a bit
Well,
curious too, on how you view kind of the dynamic between internal and external validation when it comes to playing the game. Is there a really heavy focus on just what really matters is to make the runs and playing as fun as possible, or do you also tend to look at kind of what meta level rewards and incentives can we give to the players? Like where does the focus tend to lie between those?
I would say that generally we focus the most on just making the game as fun as possible, and that can be both, right? Like you can get fun from all different parts of the experience, so we kind of look at all of it. Um, but we generally we look at what we think makes the game the most fun, and we verify that with data based on behavior of players, right?
Right. It sounded like Walter had a thought to interject with as well.
well, you kind of answered it, but I'll just say like I think that okay, so for example, with man, I'm really struggling with it. Sorry. When you yeah, sorry, just
Yeah,
move
no,
on.
fair
I can't.
enough. If we can always
Okay.
come back to it if you
I
happen to
really,
Okay, I have
you
a
kind,
come
I
up
keep
with
trying
the
to re-ask
perfect.
the
Yeah,
same
yeah.
question that you just asked, and it's not
No,
happening.
okay.
I wanted to ask. This is more of just like a for fun question to throw in there. Behind the scenes, like stuff that didn't make it to live in terms of like bugs or just silly things. What are some of the most ridiculous things that have shown up during testing that you then fixed? Like some funniest
I,
bugs.
th- I think my favorite bugs are always skin bugs. There have been skin size bugs that I've really enjoyed. Before Mac came out, his default skin was scaled wrong, and so he was tiny. And like he wasn't like Honey I Shrunk the Kids tiny. He was like just short. So like he like came up to Vanessa's like shoulder. And when you would see him in the versus screens, it was just always it felt like he was this little guy with a inferiority complex because he wasn't so small that it was like it looked broken. It just was like, oh, he's just like a short king. This is great. Another really good one is Legs Dooley, the skin
Yeah,
with the big
yeah.
legs. For the longest time, that thing was like double the size it was supposed to be, and so you were getting like a crotch shot of Dooley in the loading screen over and over, which is just seeing this giant pair of legs and then his head is like off screen was pretty funny.
That's amazing.
That is
So
amazing.
I have a question about randomness in the game and RNG because one of my favorite things about card games and why I gravitate towards them is that they are so replayable and they introduce chance and probability in a very interesting way. So in the Bazaar, do you guys have like an overarching philosophy on what constitutes good randomness versus bad, and how do you go about making sure that fights feel different, that runs feel different without it feeling like the player had no control over the outcome, etc. I'm just curious if there's. This is a very big question, of course, so feel free
Yeah.
to approach it however you want.
Yeah, I would say that it's kind of like all the other things. There's not like strict rules and like metrics for this stuff. It's more just like a feel thing. Um, but I think you've kind of hit on the head what you want of you want your runs to feel different. You want it to feel like you can't always just do the same thing, but you don't want it to feel like the only reason you win or lose is if you see X thing, right?
Yeah.
So a lot of that means kind of like back to our old topic of like trying to make it so that all of the same tier encounters uh, are about the same power level, right? And obviously we don't always hit that, but that's the aim. Trying to make it so that all of the same tier and size items have similar power levels in the correct configurations, right? And again, that's not really always going to be possible, but it's what you aim for. Um, and so I think it's just making sure that you don't have things that are completely outside the player's control that can dramatically change your run that much. Like the expedition is a pretty good example of like that's part of why it's not just a random thing. You can control to some extent how much you can see it. Like that, it's a very tricky one because you don't. If you see it every single run, it lessens the excitement of it, right? And it makes those
Yes.
things become the pillars of the meta, and it becomes a thing that is just constant, and it doesn't really. It's not good for the game, right?
Yeah, I was going to
But
mention my favorite example of this kind of rare encounter is the I think it's called the Frozen Tomb. It's when you get the ability to enchant something with icy, and it's like super like it used to be not that rare to get it from like an aerodrome, but nowadays it's like I don't know how rare it is, but it's so rare that you will almost never face an opponent that has like a day 3 icy railgun. But the times when you actually get it, you will remember them for the rest of your life, you know. So like for me, when you have those rare but super powerful and cool and memorable nodes, like the ticket, like the icy enchant, I think that's extremely healthy for the game because it's also a way for beginners or players who aren't maybe that good at the game to still they feel like, oh, I got the ability to win now because I found this super rare nodes. So I just want to say, like, for me, one of the best ways to balance that kind of exciting feeling is by making it something rare but also super memorable, which I think you guys overall are very good at doing. So yeah, just I was just curious about how much that is intentional and how much just kind of happened naturally.
Yeah, I would say that it's largely intentional. And then kind of back to the point from before of like, ideally, the more you have a bunch of those things, the more frequently you can make them show up, so long as it's not just the same thing over and over, right? Like in the world where you have 10 different cool, unique, legendary encounters or expeditions or whatever, you can make it so people see one every single run, right? Because then you're not seeing the same one every run, which means that you are getting a different experience and it feels different. And that's kind of the ideal, is if we can get to the point where there are enough of these things that we can show them more frequently and clamp like how many you see per run, that always feels better to us than just making it purely random. But when it is only a couple of them, you do kind of have to make it random, because otherwise you'll get into this point where that's like all the game is about, right?
Yeah, for sure.
I
Uh,
kind of have another question. How do you think about the like structure of the PvP of the game? Like when you have uh like a player versus ghost system, the way you have that opens up a lot of opportunities to do things that you couldn't do if you had like live opponents. And like what, for example, like one of those things is like maybe you could potentially in a future season like see one of the cards on your opponent's board like before you had to click on them for the PvP or something like that, which would be like an advantage for you as a player to maybe like give you the opportunity to make a smart change of your loadout or whatever before you click the fight. Is there like any thought to how to take advantage of like, because I think the async system is so smart. Like it enables all the so many great things about the game, like the fact that I can get up and you know, go eat lunch and then come back in the middle of my run and you know I haven't griefed four of my teammates or whatever is an amazing thing, right? So is there effort or thought put towards how can you really take advantage of some of the opportunities of the async?
Yeah, I mean, it's something we think about. I would say that we generally have a design philosophy where we don't want to have people doing a ton of like sideboardy board swapping stuff before the end of the fight or before the PvP fights, just because it really raises the skill ceiling, right? A lot. Um, and it makes it much harder for newer players. Like knowing how to sideboard is an incredibly difficult thing that even like top tier Magic players are not always great at. It requires you to know the meta. It requires you to understand what's currently possible and what the person you're going up against kit is. And then even if you're seeing like their full board, it creates this like analysis paralysis moment of like trying to figure out what you even should be doing in that moment. And it's generally not a play pattern we love. We like it more with the monsters because they're static, right? So once you learn them, you know them, and there's like a limited number of them. Um, but I would say in general, that specific thing is something we're probably not going to do much of. Like I could see a world where like someday there's like an item you get that when you have it, you get to see a preview of something, right? So like if you can like opt into that if you want to, and it's
Yeah,
not
like spyglass or
ubiquitous.
something. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Where like advanced players playing a specific character in a specific build get a little bit of that. Maybe, but in general, it's kind of something we don't love for the game. We want to keep the game accessible, and like right now, it's not super accessible. Like the game is very hard. And I would say that one of the things we will look for in the future is to try and make it easier for new players to enjoy themselves and to not get stomped all the time. Uh, so generally, we are
Well, I
going to
think
be
the
trending
XP
more that
changes
way, I think.
were effort towards that, right? I assume that the reason the XP was made what it is now was to that end, to make it so it wasn't so much of like a knowledge test for like, did you know which specific nodes have the extra XP that lets you get a level sooner, and
Yeah,
so it feels
yeah.
more fair between less and more experienced players.
So on the topic of ghosts and the asynchronous gameplay pattern in PvP fights, one of my least favorite and most outspoken, well, dismays are the tech items in the game, because unlike in other card games I've played, since the ghost, or rather, since your ghost, when your ghost goes into the pool, it matches into a random player. If I put a tech item on the board, like for example a Caltrops or a Thronet or some kind of very polarizing item that specifically targets a specific build, if then my ghost enters the pool and the player who faces my ghost happens to be playing, for example, a build that is, uh, let's say, it gets very countered by a Thronet or whatever, it feels like you. It feels very frustrating, and it seems that you guys are uh, through the patches kind of moving away from those kind of items that are either they just win the matchup or they are completely useless. Like, it seems that you guys are getting better at finding like a balance. For example, I have heard that you guys are planning on removing the uh, chart, like for Ice Club, it will no longer charge from enemy freeze effects, if I understand correctly. So, like, I'm just curious if you also agree that those kind of items that are so polarizing aren't, maybe like when they are strong, it can lead to frustrating gameplay patterns. I'm just curious, like, to pick your brain on that topic, because this is
Yeah,
unique for the Bazaar compared to other card games, I think.
yeah, 100%. I mean, that's part of why we have this stance on sideboarding stuff, is that when you do get yourself into this situation, you end up with all these weird sideboarded ghosts. Like, if you are in the world where you can see that someone is running X build and it's like a burn build, right? And then you slop into all of your anti-burn stuff. Well, now you've made this weird anti-burn ghost that's going to be floating around, either getting wrecked by some builds or completely dominating in a way that doesn't feel very fun, because you just random into if you win or lose. So as much as possible, we try and avoid that stuff. We usually cost most of that anti stuff like internally as like essentially free and more like a flavor thing. And it's not like for instance, coolant doesn't reduce burn because we want the interaction of an item reducing burn. It reduces burn because it's coolant and it feels like it should reduce burn, right?
Yeah,
So like it's things like that where it's like if we have a couple of them, it's not a big deal. But generally, it is something we avoid. And actually, the Ice Club change has been live, I think, for a week
Yeah, I
at
was
least.
about to say the
Um,
Yetarian club as it is
yeah,
now is already changed to not
oh yeah, great.
activate on enemy freezes.
yeah. So in general, we agree with that stuff. I mean, the thing is like, where do you draw the line? Obviously, like
Well,
Caltrops
okay.
is an interesting one, right? Because Caltrops is generically good against most builds, right? Like it's not like a one-off matchup, but there are certain builds that just hard counter it. Like that is more of an acceptable place. Like at least when you play Caltrops, it's not like um you're gonna lose 50% of your matchups, right? Like you're gonna be in a decent place in the majority of your matchups. I mean, you may still lose, right? But your build will function. Whereas like if for instance we had a similar item that was when your enemy uses a friend, right? That's too narrow. Like that wouldn't make any sense because you would have to know what you're facing for it to do anything. Now if it's like a
Yeah,
splashed bonus flavor ability on the thing that you don't really need for the item to be good, sure. But
I
even
was
then,
going to
it would not
say,
want to be super powerful.
if we get like a PvE mode, like I don't know what to call it, but like we only face monsters that are like, as you said, static, I would be all in favor of like having these kind of cool tech cards that you could have in your stash. And like, even in Bazaar, for example, you mentioned coolant. That is an item that I loved just having in my stash and dually, specifically against monsters like the dragon or the ghost pepper, right? Like that, for me, that is super rewarding, having these sideboard items for specifically the monster fights. But my main issue, and you already touched on that, is like when those items are so good that you also put them against the player fights, and then you get these super polarizing games where it feels like one single item decided the matchup. But I think overall this is something you guys are like, as you said, there are very few items like this currently in the game, and I agree that like if an item has a flavor, for example, coolant or whatever, where just the mechanic just feels right, I think flavor and theme is something we have to also value, right? Like the game isn't just like a math spreadsheet. You also have to take into account like telling a story, the card being fun and memorable, etc. So yeah, just it was nice like hearing from a game designer like what you guys are thinking about this, because it's something we have discussed a lot on the podcast. You know.
Yeah, I mean, I do like the idea of like softer kind of answers, like to put it in Magic terms, like less chill, more great stable stag, like more cards that do something on their own, but then also have like some kind of specific like anti-meta function or whatever. I think that that's having like the dedicated only like this beats this setup is bad. I agree. I mean, I think it does create a lot of like flippy situations where you're hoping your opponent is playing one specific build or like one of two specific builds, and then if they're not, then your card does nothing. Like, I mean, I definitely don't think that you're right that they are skill intensive, and they're also like not particularly like good feeling. The only like good feeling that comes out of it is like when you put a sideboard card in play and it's the exact perfect card to counter your opponent. Like that's like the one positive. But like if you consider like the possible outcomes, many more of the possible outcomes are like feel bads than feel goods. So it does make sense that you want to reduce the amount of that in the game as much as possible.
Yeah, I would say generally any item that when you're building it, the consideration is what your opponent is running as the primary consideration is just not a thing we want to do at all. The consideration should be what does this do for your build? Does it fit in your build? Will it make your build better? And then if it occasionally is better against certain builds, great. If like you have two items and you play one of them in the role for against Dooley and another one against Pig, sure, that's fine. But they should still be like items you want in your build that do something in your build, right? Like an example might be if you had a version, if you're playing one weapon Vanessa, right? In a world where she's really good, and against Pig you decide to swap in your sniper rifle, and against Dooley you swap in your eels, right? Where it's like they're essentially both good one weapon items. One of them might be better against a certain hero than the other one, so you switch it up.
That makes a lot of sense. Before we move on to any further questions, I thought I would just double check from memory. You have around maybe 20-25 more minutes?
Yeah, I got about 20 minutes.
Yeah, okay, cool. Just so that I know when I need to start wrapping things up a little bit. But I had
Yeah.
another, like, kind of just for fun question. If you have any particular favorite items or builds yourself.
I don't know that I would say I have favorite builds. I kind of like to just play. I'm a big fan of status builds. So like burn, poison. I'm a big combo guy. So like any sort of weird engine I'm building is much more fun to me than like weapon spam or something. But there are versions of that that can be combo-y also. Uh, but I would say like from a design perspective, some of my favorite items are I really like items that make you do a very specific thing and then have an exciting payoff for them. So like fort and library, which are very
Hmm.
exciting, fairly simple designs that fit in
He
specific
said the
builds.
word.
Yeah.
We had
Um,
a rant about library on the last
yeah,
episode.
library may be overtuned, mind you.
Yeah,
But it's a really fun design of like you can't like one of Mac's best builds obviously is his lifesteal weapon build, and you just can't run it all in that build, right? And then there are tons of builds that have a couple incidental weapons that you can't really run it in. And so it making you go a certain direction and then feeling like a really cool payoff for when you do is very exciting. I think Fort actually is better because it's asking you to do something that is like counter to what you normally do in the game, like what's normally good, but the payoff is good enough that it actually does get there a lot. Like it's one of the best items in the game. Um, and then from like beyond that, I think like Zorsid is actually one of my favorite
Oh
cards,
yes, love that little guy.
because it's just so flexible. And that
Mm.
was like when I designed it, it was very intentional of like, I want to make this thing that can kind of straddle a bunch of her builds and having this like it's aquatic, so it matters for that occasionally. It can get you a ton of aquatic triggers. The actual thing it does itself is not crazy powerful, but it's good. It gives you targeted haste, which matters for certain builds. It's a burn payoff. Like you can't just slap it in your build. You have to have something enabling it. All those things together, just like it fits in a ton of builds. It plays really nice. It's never like wildly overpowered. Well, that's not. There are times it's overpowered, but it's extremely rare for you to get the builds where that's like your actual carry item. Um, so it kind of just all comes together in a nice way. And it's not even that complicated. Like it has a bunch of stuff going on, but it's not like
I
crazy
prefer it
complex.
when the glue pieces are overpowered as opposed to when the
Yeah,
payoffs are overpowered, honestly. I think that makes for a more fun game overall.
but I
Yeah, you
think
also can
the
pivot with it, right? Like you can
yeah.
start with it in a
For that
certain
reason,
build
that's
and then be like,
that's
I'll
part of
switch
the
to another
appeal.
one. Yep.
And just the concept in general of like whenever a payoff is the strong part, it tends to homogenize things around itself, whereas when something that supports other pieces is really powerful, then a lot of the time you get a lot of agency in terms of what do you want to support with this item that supports things.
Yeah, and then
So,
the payoffs that are very, very powerful, when they don't require you to do a like too specific of a thing.
mhm,
That's part of what I think I like about Fort and Library, right? Is that the
yes.
requirement for doing them is open enough that you can build them in a ton of different ways, right? Like you can have uh, a resto or a regenning library build. You can have with like a soul ring or something to finish them off with poison. You can have a poison one. You can have the relic one. You can have the burn one. There's tons of different ways to build it. And the same with fort, right? Like you can be a pacifist fort. You can be a aggressive fort. You can do all kinds of different stuff with it. So it doesn't feel like every time you run into a fort build, it's the same other items alongside it.
Yeah, I think at the very least for Pygmalion, I do think Fort is my favorite item. My overall favorite item has oftentimes been known to be Keg or Arbalest, and I gotta give you props for it. I blame it almost entirely on the fact that you guys made that like big screen shake that you get when you hit someone with like a really stupid number. It's so visceral and satisfying. Like, I will never get tired of just sending kegs into people's faces. It feels too good.
Yeah, I feel
My
like
favorite card was
Runic Blade
Bar of
does a bit of
Gold,
that.
and
Mm,
now it's
Nice.
Chimeric Egg.
yes.
You
Yeah,
So
Yeah,
eclipsed it.
egg was fun. That was a
egg
fun
was
one.
fun.
on the topic of favorite items, and this is my final question as well. I have made it no secret that I absolutely adored the bugs, Bugadoodly, and specifically the blue bug because, and this I've mentioned it many times. I think of all the mechanics in the game, my favorite mechanic you guys have ever designed from a intuitive, like thematic, just how easy it is to understand what it does is freeze. Like I am an unabashed freeze apologist, which I know is extremely unpopular. I think freeze is probably the most polarizing and hated mechanic in the community, at least on the Discord server on Reddit. So I'm just curious because there is so much pushback whenever a freeze build is strong. Like we've seen it with Pygmalion, Mac, and Dooley, and even Vanessa when she had the port build back in the day. But I'm just wondering, like, do you guys, from your perspective, like when it comes to freeze as a mechanic, do you, when you balance that, do you go by win rate or do you go by like community perception? Because it is a very polarizing and disruptive mechanic where obviously being on the losing end of a freeze board can be frustrating. So how do you guys go about like balancing that mechanic? because I understand it's probably one of the more difficult things to get right. So I'm just very curious as a freeze lover myself.
Yeah, I mean, freeze is tricky. Is a tricky subject. The feeling of not getting to play is just so negative. That generally we don't love freeze lock builds unless they are like extremely hard to assemble. Which is part of what the problem with the Mac one most recently was, is that it shouldn't be that easy. Like if you're if you like completely high rolled and you get all the pieces and you can freeze lock people, occasionally that's not the end of the world. But when it's just like a constant thing, the thing we have tried to do is shift more and more freeze builds towards freeze is a disruption mechanic as opposed to a straight up control mechanic, kind of like slow, where when your board is perma slowed, it's annoying, but it doesn't. And it honestly, it might even lead to similar win rate increases a lot of the time, but it doesn't feel nearly as bad because you're still doing something at least. And so trying to find a place where the freeze build is not locking you out, but instead is disrupting what you're doing a little bit and throwing your timings off and slowing you down, and then giving you a bunch of triggers and buffs because of the freezing is often a better place, we feel like.
Yeah, we used
But
to
it's
have
really
that
hard to
skill
dial that in.
in the game. I forgot what it's called.
Rapid thaw.
Rapid thaw, as well as I know there have been like a community favorite suggestion is, since shield counters burn, having burn thematically be some way to counter freeze. Like people have suggested, like burn items. Like if you have burn or self burn, you freeze effects are hard or something like that. Like, have you guys ever considered like balancing freeze by having some kind of counter to it, the way, for example, shield counters burn, or are you more approaching it from, we want the freeze items themselves to be much harder to assemble? I'm just curious if that's ever been something you like, if you have ever considered making, like, changing the mechanic itself in some fundamental way as a way to
I
balance
would
it.
I would say both. We've talked about things like diminishing returns, right, and stuff like that, and we don't really like that approach because it's so secret, like it's so learned. Like for a starting player, not understanding diminishing returns and not like it's complicated to explain it. It's something you have to show, and it's really hard to understand. Like, well, why isn't my item working now? So that kind of thing is not something we're really interested in. Um, but we do definitely look at like more holistic approaches in addition to item based. Um, I think it's entirely possible that at some point there will be something that is like kind of a freeze counter in the game. Um, but we'll see if we get to something that's actually that. Uh, and I'd say for the most part, it's generally safer to do it on an item by item level. The trick with burn is that because burn is player based and freeze is item based, it doesn't really make that much sense. It's not super clear. Like you would have to have the burn on you, as you said, and then it becomes like a global thing that is kind of not
It
great.
also becomes like Dooley is the only character who can reliably self burn, right?
Yeah, if it's self burn, then it's even worse because it's like if
Yeah,
it's
sure,
burn at all,
sure.
then it's like okay, maybe, but then the thematic is so disconnected from what's happening. Like the idea that you're burning them and then that is lowering your freeze is just like kind of a step in reasoning, and then also conveying that to a player as that's what's happening is not very easy, like because you're disconnected where the effect for the burn is from the items. So if there was a thing that we came up with that would be like uh you know mechanical counter to freeze, I would expect it to be item based, like radiant, right? um
Oh
but
yeah.
yeah, so I think that is definitely a place we could explore in the future. uh but for the most part, I would say that the focus right now is more on individual items.
Well, how
Okay.
do you feel about Radiant, honestly? Like, because I know you mentioned it almost kind of goes along with the sideboarding discussion in a way. Like, Radiant is an enchantment that's the most polarizing, right?
Yeah,
It either does nothing or it does everything. So, I mean, is there like a thought to making Radiant somehow like softer? Like, like maybe it could affect like adjacent items but to like a lesser degree, like slows on adjacent items would be reduced or something like that. Like just something to make it not like either everything or nothing, depending on what build you are. Like, because that's how it feels right now. It's like
Yeah.
for a lot of builds, Radiant is completely meaningless, and then for other builds, it's incredible.
Yeah, I would say that it's definitely something we look at and consider. I do think it is a little different on an enchantment than a base item, because the base item still does, like, you're using the base item for what the base item is. And so when you have the decision between do I put Radiant or do I put Fiery on your carry item, the decision here is more like, do I need more throughput to push my build over the top? Or if my build is good enough, can I splurge and take the thing that will make me control proof? Right? Like, you're still going to
But
run
like
the
for
item,
most
whether
build,
it's one or
yeah,
the
but for
other.
most builds, like you don't even want Radiant even on your like, or maybe you want it on your carry item, but like a lot of times when you see Radiant as your one of two examples, you're like, this doesn't apply, or you're one of two enchantments, this doesn't apply to my build really, or at least that's the
Yeah, I
feeling
mean,
I.
that is something we want to look into how some of the radiant enchants work, and we don't love the way that the radiant enchant does targeting. We have some ideas for how we want to adjust that in the future. Um, but for now, it is what it is. Uh, but yeah, I would say that, like, we don't love the idea that sometimes taking the radiant enchant makes your build worse. That definitely we don't like. Um, and it does feel like you want it to be kind of more generally good. But I mean, it's tricky. Like, it's gonna, the changes we're gonna want to make to Radiant eventually probably will require some tech adjustments. Um, and there's, as we said, there's
Yeah,
a
it
lot
makes
of
sense that it
stuff.
would have to change the way to, because like the old way was unfair in a way also, right? Where
Yeah,
like where like your opponents couldn't generate triggers because your items were like that was also weird. Like why isn't my item working? Oh, because my slow item didn't land a slow on a like that was also strange and very counterintuitive because it just seemed like my item wouldn't work. But what actually happened was an effect I was depending on targeted a radiant item that I barely even noticed was radiant on my opponent's board. You know what I mean?
yeah, and I would
So
say that the current behavior of Radiant with its targeting rules was not entirely an intended behavior. It was more like we did not like the way that the targeting behavior of items was so convoluted. And again, back to the point of, like, diminishing returns. As a new player, it was really hard to understand. There were situations where it was like, well, you're better off not putting this item on your board, or not getting this enchant, or not doing this thing, because it's going to screw up your targeting logic for your haste item, right? Or your slow item or
mhm.
whatever, because of the way that, like, it wouldn't stack and it would target different things. So shifting that to just like a simpler things just target is just random, is just so much easier for players to understand, and then doesn't create these weird play lines that you need to optimize. However, that also came with some stuff with things like Radiant that we didn't love, but that we haven't been able to address yet. So I would hope that at some point we will get back to a state where, like, you can free your Radiant items can be targeted by things like slow and freeze, just like any other item could, but that it also doesn't fizzle, like, when you freeze stuff. Like ideally to me, it would be you shoot the freeze thing at it, and then it has an effect when it hits it of it, like, bouncing off, right?
Yeah, like the way Null Frost Alter works, but also like that itself is its own weird thing. Like I know I saw clips from over the weekend, like people just getting permafrozen with Null Frost Alter because they were able to like overwhelm the ICD, and so it's like I wonder, like I don't want to send you down, down the rabbit hole chasing Radiant, but it also seems that if Radiant instantly cleansed the status effect that was put on it, that might also come with its own downsides. Like meaning like it might still be slowed for short periods of time if it had multiple simultaneous slows landed on it because of the ICD. So yeah, I could see how there's a um something difficult going on there.
Yeah, it's we have plans. It's just gonna take a bit before
Okay.
I think
Yeah.
we can get to them.
Okay, as kind of one final question, I know that I've heard you comment that one item that can give you some headaches is Sapphire. And it made me kind of curious if how willing do you guys tend to be to rework an item when you feel like just balance adjustments aren't necessarily like sufficient to deal with the problem? Where do you kind of put the thresholds for it has to be kind of to this degree for us to be willing to go with a straight up rework?
Generally, we don't want balance to drive our design process. Like we want to have a balanced experience, and I would even say we don't necessarily even want to have a balanced experience. Like if it's a balanced experience, you're not excited about anything because everything is the same, right? Like there needs to be peaks and valleys in your design for there to be excitement about like, oh, I got the cool rare thing, right? Um, that being said, we want the experience to be fun, and if it's completely out of balance, it's not fun. But we don't want to make an item perform a specific way purely because it's too good if it goes the other way. We'd rather try and find a way to adjust it if that's what we think is the proper behavior for the item. Sapphire specifically is complicated because it's part of a cycle. If it wasn't part of a cycle, it probably would have been changed already. So that kind of is the sticking point on that one. Um, and by making it not by having a cycle where one part of the cycle is not the same as the other parts, uh, like the reason you make cycles a lot of the time is for shortcutting in your head what the behavior of an item is. And if you don't have them actually behaving the same, then it can lead to mistakes in play where you assume, oh, well, the emerald and the sapphire are like the same, but one's for poison and one's for freeze. So I'll treat them the same. Whereas if one of them is doing something different, you're like, oh, wait a minute, I have to do something else with this thing. So that's like the thing that holds us back from just changing it. Um, but it's a continuous struggle, right? Of like what is more important. Um, I still want to do some changes to Sapphire, but we all have to agree, obviously, right? And we'll see if that happens.
Yeah, there we go. And before we send you off, this is kind of an optional one. It obviously depends entirely on what you can or cannot share. But just as a treat to the people who have listened to the very end, is there anything in particular that you feel like you can like lightly tease that people might look forward to in the near-ish future?
Um, yeah, I mean, I would say that expect there to be more expeditions over time. Um, I can't tell you exactly when more of them will show up, partially because they haven't been fully made, and I can't be sure when they will even show up. Um, but we love them, and we're going to try and make more. And the new card packs are fun. Uh, some cool new stuff. I think it's been revealed that it's Pig and Vanessa coming for the new stuff. And they both have some pretty fun stuff in there. Vanessa gets to explore some of the stuff she hasn't, like a side of her character that we have not seen as much. Um, so yeah, I think there'll be some fun stuff in there. I'm sure some of the items will be too powerful initially, as is tradition, and we'll nerf them quickly.
There's no way that
But
could possibly happen.
yeah, right. I mean, the trick is like you you always see people with these conspiracy theories of like, oh, it's because they want to make sure that people buy them right away while they're broken. It's like it's really not that. It's that you don't want to release items that aren't fun. Like
You
if
could
you
Yeah.
argue
release a new
against.
pack and none of the stuff is playable and it's lame, you don't want to play with it. It's not about buying it. It's about it's not fun to play. And we've seen that once or twice with the initial release of packs. I mean, you remember even back to like the first Vanessa pack when it first launched. I remember Crip saying like you shouldn't even get it because it makes her worse, right?
Yeah, the
Um,
good old like everyone just calling it pay to lose.
yeah, and it's
Also,
Yeah.
like I don't I don't think that that is necessarily was necessarily true
Yeah.
even then, but it's like it just you don't want to play the game and
It
have it feel like
spoke
that.
to a certain sentiment within the player base.
I almost feel
Yes.
you like have to release stuff overpowered because the players are going to be, bad at using them when they first come out. Like it's the same way they like this is what they do with the League of Legends champions too. It's the same thing.
Yeah.
People are bad at the stuff when it comes out, and so it has a really low win rate, so they have to release it overpowered. Otherwise, everyone thinks it's terrible, and then once it's in the player's mind that something is bad, it's very hard to remove that from the consensus of the community that X item is terrible, and then even
Yeah,
if you buff it, it's just
I'll say to that point, when you watch, I watch Northern Lion a bunch because he entertains me endlessly. Him streaming that is Bazaar is a fun watch. It's a challenging
I
watch at times,
yeah, if you like to
but
watch
it's a fun watch.
you like to watch someone sell
He's
every
just
chocolate bar,
screaming
then
at the
click
screen
on
occasionally.
10 City Mayor.
Yeah. But there are moments where he will not even look at an item because in his head he has decided the item is bad. So like I've seen
Dude,
multiple times where Pesky Pete was in the shop and he doesn't even hover over it because he's like, well, in his head he's internalized Pesky Pete is terrible, so I will
he
never
will
buy
not
that.
even look at heroes because he has internalized that Dooley is this overpowered, hateful hero. But I think that he would love Dooley if he ever tried him. Like, yeah.
I feel like the reason he doesn't try other heroes is more just because there's a lot, right? Like
Yeah.
he doesn't
Yeah, but
play
he
For
this
tried
sure.
as much as us. He
Pig
tried
and
Mac for a
like
little bit,
Mac.
yeah.
Yeah, but like those are like for me, like I suck at playing Pig and Mac. Like I was like Dooley's. I mean, it comes down to player, of course, but I feel like you should always try the heroes because some just appeal to certain personalities. But that's off tangent there. But yeah,
Yeah,
that's
you're definitely
Yeah,
not
Hold
biased.
on, yeah, wait, well, hold on. One more rapid fire question. Why is Bill Dozer a friend, but Bill Board isn't?
asking the important
Yeah,
questions.
It's true.
Uh,
This has
the
been
hard
Pig
keeping
hitting.
has
Walter up all night.
Pig has very few friends.
Mm.
The Yeah, I don't know if you guys his latest video he actually got to the expedition, which was that's the other thing I think that I really enjoy with watching him is I get to see more like what a normal person is like playing the game, which is funny because he's not a normal person, right? Like he does play a lot of games. He's extremely intelligent. He's very good at this stuff. But he's not as clued into the game,
Yeah.
right?
Did you
As
guys
the people
rename
clued into
Powder
the game.
Flask for his sake because it's now
No,
Powder Horn, which
we did not, but we did see that we renamed it just because we felt like it was not a great name. It wasn't really a flask.
yeah, but he's
But
now
yes,
calling
it
it a
was pretty
flask. It's so
funny.
funny.
Yeah,
Like you finally
absolutely.
rename it and now he's calling it a flask. So it's
I
you
love it.
never win. Yeah.
Um, but I don't know if you guys saw, he got into the event. He got to the the monster fight, and he picked the hardest monster, and he lost. And he didn't see the legendary. He missed out on the legendary. So I'm very excited to see when he actually gets to the legendary.
Yeah.
Lot of things to look forward to. Thank you very much for your time. This has been a wonderful opportunity and just a lot of fun.
Yeah, we really
Yeah,
appreciate it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it
great
was
being
awesome.
here.
We're sure we'll see more of you around, and if not, you will unleash all of your torments onto us, and we will remember you in spirit, as we
Yep.
suffer.
And I'm active on the Discord, the Bazaar Discord. So if people have questions, you can always ask them. I can't always answer them, but when I can, I do.
Yeah, okay. Well, that sounds great. Thanks to everyone who's watched this to the very end as well. As I said at the start, as per usual, this will be up on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, RSS feed, the usual stuff. Regular episode coming later this week, as per usual. And hopefully we'll see some of you there. And until the next time.